So don't believe that, right? Don't believe half of that. This is going to be different. There are no slides, right? I'm going to talk to you. I know, nothing to look at but me. That's terrible, okay? Really bad planning on my part. This is going to be different in the sense of, so I've been listening all the time, listening. We all learned about listening yesterday. And you've heard a lot about individual well-being, right? You've all got your glass jar. You've got your golf balls. You're going to put them in the glass, and you know what's on them, right? That's good. You've heard today a lot about corporates. Jan, the brilliant Jan, has done the work on trying to establish the relationship between well-being and productivity, well-being and profitability now, all of those things. Great. Let me just say, as someone that chairs a company, I chair a company called Frontier Economics, the kind of company that probably most of you would hate to death because we have 400 economists, you know, most undiverse company known to man, right? Frontier basically is another way of doing what's up there, what Jan was talking about. What's the thing about well-being? Sense of belonging. How do you get a sense of belonging? You know, you've heard from the big corporates about, you know, this policy, the HR people do this. Frontier did it very well. Because they're a bunch of economists, they said, no, we can make this stuff up just the way we want it to. So basically, we decided that everyone owns the firm. That way, it is a sense of belonging because it's yours. So everybody owns the firm in the sense of a mutual. We can never be sold. If we can't ever be sold, we don't have to worry too much about profit, right? So our number one value is fun, right? Second one's interesting. We do have profitable in there somewhere because we want to carry on having fun and being interesting. So that's the corporate bit. I'm not going to talk about that, actually, having said I would. The third part, which I think is the bit that you haven't really had, is the whole bit about where does government stand in all of this, right? You had the mayor, the nearest we've got to a politician in all of this. But I want to talk to you about the importance of getting government on side. You all matter for this. And in order to do this, I'm going to tell you about, you heard a little bit about the successes I had. I'm going to talk to you about the failures, right? So when we put that coalition government together in 2010, I talked to the person that became Prime Minister, David Cameron, when he's in opposition. We talk about what do they want to do when they come in. And it was a really exciting program. He'd read Nudge, right? Dick Saylor, who many of you know, Nobel Prize-winning economist. Dick Saylor and Cass Sunstein wrote this book about behavior change, right? And how that can change things and makes public policy a lot more effective because it basically is public policy for humans, right? If you do, Jan was talking about neoclassical economics, you do public policy for positronic robots, right? Works brilliantly for robots. Doesn't really work with humans, right? You are all, I think, human. Therefore, we do need to think about the behavioral stuff. Now, so I talked to him about behavioral stuff, and with David Halpern, we set up a thing called the Behavioral Insights team. I'll mention a tiny bit about that. But the point I said to him is, so why do you want to change behavior? It was like, that's a good question. Well, what does Dick Saylor say? And I said, well, look, let's just think about it. What's your ultimate goal here? And he was like, increasing GDP growth? Oh, no. GDP per capita? I was like, possibly not. What about improving everybody's lives? Oh, yeah, I like that. Yeah, right, okay. Well-being, right? Let's do that. Okay. So we start off and we say, okay, so how are we going to do this, Gus? And I said, well, one of the problems is you've seen the phrase that was put up there, you know, if you treasure it, measure it. We didn't measure it. So how are we going to get real policies with real data underpinning them to convince the people? I used to be in charge of the Treasury. Believe me, convincing the Treasury of anything is just completely impossible. They love to say no. That's their job, right? So basically, data and evidence is the best thing we've got. So we started collecting. We've got the ONS, Office of National Statistics, to do the 4 questions, you know. Overall, how satisfied are you with your life? How worthwhile is it? And then one on happiness and one on anxiety. So we covered all the dimensions. Aristotle's going to come into this, right? I know because I was here earlier, saw the Aristotle bit, so I'm going to use that. Steal from everybody with pride. So we get the 4 questions up there. The ONS starts to measure them. We start to get great data, which has been unbelievably useful during COVID, right? we could not have been able to track what was going on if we didn't have data in the run-up to it. So knowing, being able to project the counterfactual, what if no COVID, for things like closing schools, impact on well-being of kids and parents and all sorts of things. So massively good. So I start off, I'm thinking, brilliant. We got the behavior change unit, the nudge unit's going gangbusters. There's nudge units appearing all around the world. Well-being. Starts off well. At this point, I decide, I reach retirement age in the civil service, so I leave. I go off to do other things, thinking it's all going beautifully. And the problem is the government has come in with another big problem, which is they've got a big deficit. So they want to cut the deficit. Now, the problem then is they're coming up with these policies to cut the deficit, Treasury, God bless them, and they're saying they want to care about well-being at the same time. The two are not aligned, right? They're not doing it in a way that actually minimizes the hit to well-being of taking in a deficit reduction program. So people start to get cynical about it and say, you're only talking about well-being because you don't want to talk about GDP because it's not going very well. It's not going very well because of all your cuts. And so basically, after a few years, the David Cameron idea about big society, talking about charities, talking about well-being, just disappears. Failure. Miserable failure, right? But the ONS are still collecting the data. So I want to learn from that failure. I need to tell you about my failures. Learn from the failure to say, so what do we learn from this? How do we persuade politicians? I'm the nearest you got to one, right? And I'm not one. What do we do, and what do all of you do to try and persuade them that this is the right thing, that the goal of society, the goal of governments should be to increase well-being and, very importantly, reduce inequalities in well-being. Very good paper by the What Works Centre on Wellbeing on that very subject. Yes, thank you for the clap there, one of you. So, the well-being movement, your manifesto, our manifesto, let's put well-being first. The only thing I want to add on to that, because, when I was at school, we read the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx, you have nothing to lose but your misery. Right? I think that's the nice subtitle. Because, thank you, Richard, he wouldn't lend me his orange hat. I mean, can you believe that? So I do think that combination is what works. So increasing well-being and reducing inequalities in well-being, thinking about how do you get a misery, because that is the best way of raising the average level of well-being without a doubt. And I'll come back to what we have to do. Right, so how do we convince the politicians? I want to steal from your wonderful session on teaching happiness, Aristotle. So, obviously I'm going to remind you, pathos, ethos, and logos. You all know this, yeah? But basically, pathos is about emotions. So how do we get the emotions there? Now, this is where I'm going to get slightly controversial with the well-being movement, in that I think it's all about language. It's all about having something people understand. And let me give you an example of someone making a complete dog's dinner of language in order to show you what's going to happen. So in the UK, those of you who follow politics there, Tory party haven't been doing too well, right? They're about 20-odd points behind. We've had more prime ministers than I can remember. Chancellors come and go. The bond market kills them. Things aren't great. The Labour Party are looking like they might win the next election. Keir Starmer, who I worked with when I, in fact, hired Director of Public Prosecutions, great guy, they have an opportunity at some point before January 2025 to win an election when the Conservatives decide to call it, and they could do great things. So they come up with a mission on the economy. What does the mission statement say? It says, our mission is to have the fastest growth in GDP per capita in the G7 by the end of the Parliament. Right? That is wrong at so many levels, right? So many different levels. I mean, if the G7 all go into massive recession, so they've all got negative growth, so we've got slightly less negative growth, we're all going to be happy? Nah. GDP. I mean, I remember some politicians saying, well, GDP growth this year was 1.25%. And a woman said, that's not my GDP. Right? It doesn't work. And the interesting thing is Keir Starmer knows it doesn't work, because when he explained this at the press conference, he said, what we're trying to do is build better lives, right? Very simple. Make people's lives better. And once you get that, you say, okay, make people's lives better. So people's lives, it's about how they feel about their lives. Subjective well-being measure, okay, so where are they on life satisfaction? Perfect. That's what we do. People know best. We're not trying as some elite to say what the right thing is. So let's do that, right? Maximizing GDP. I mean, where can I start? I think I'm going to start with the volunteers in the audience, because we've got lots of volunteers, beautiful pink things. Where are you? You're all lovely. You're all amazing. They're probably all working now. What I would like to do is say to the volunteers, you know what? My policy at the moment is to maximize GDP. What I want you to do is stop volunteering, because volunteering, curiously enough, isn't measured in GDP. But if you take up prostitution or illegal drug selling, you'll be fine, because both of those are included in GDP, and it will put it up. That's how stupid. So I think the way we handle GDP is to ridicule it, right? And we need proper, serious economists to be ridiculing it all the time. Because the guy who put it together, Simon Kuznets, said, whatever you do, don't use this as a success measure. It's an activity measure. And some activities are bad. If we were to open lots more coal mines, GDP goes up. Is that a good thing? No. Stupid measure, shouldn't go near it. Labour will change its mind. They'll do something different. Right, so make people's lives better. How do we get this story and language across, these emotions? First of all, we need a broad appeal. So we need to think about getting very different audiences on side. This is why I think language is important. For some people, when you talk about well-being, it's, okay, you're now talking about the middle classes, you're talking about spas, and you're doing this because you don't care about poverty. That's the critique you get from the left. Well, actually, when we think about it, and the work that people like Richard Layard and Jan have done, and that inequalities in well-being, the people who have the worst well-being, there's definitely low income's part of it, but the biggest part is mental health, right? So if you really care about reducing inequalities, you'd reduce inequalities in well-being. It's not the same as reducing inequalities in income. That's part of it at the low end, but it's not everything. So we need to do that. So with the left, with the right, they say, well, the trouble with well-being is, you're going to interfere in people's lives. You're going to interfere with companies and with private. You don't believe in private sector. You don't believe in markets. That's not true. You've just heard from what Jan was saying that actually good companies that are doing the well-being stuff well, do well. Blindingly obvious, really, but but markets don't seem to get it. So we do need to think about the fact that on the right we say, no, we do believe in a vibrant private sector, we do believe in markets, but we believe in good companies and good markets. And when there's market failures or companies are failing, we should do something about it. So I think you could appeal to both. I think you have to kind of make sure when you do these appeals that you're not doing what happened during our wonderful Brexit referendum campaign, right? Brexit referendum campaign was brilliant, right? The people running it, take back control. On the one hand, they told the right, don't worry, what we're doing with Brexit is we're going to create Singapore on sea. Low taxes, low regulation, we're not going to interfere in your lives, let the private sector rip, right? And they're saying to the left, actually, don't worry, the thing about the EU is they don't allow state aids. So, they stop us doing state aid, so we can't bail out failing companies. They have free movement of labor. So, people are coming in, taking your jobs, all those sorts of things. And they manage to differentiate their audience, give completely inconsistent messages, and yet win. Now, the lesson we learn from that in the well-being movement, we want to convince people, is that we do need to differentiate audiences, but we need to make sure that all the messages are consistent. And that is absolutely powerful. If you don't do that, you will win the battle and lose the war. Brexit support in the UK has plummeted since people began to realize, oh my God, it's not very good. Right, so ethos. This is all about policies, really, behaviors. And And when you think about behaviors and policies, what would a government that really cared about well-being and reducing inequalities and well-being, what would they do? And the answer is, you can go through every single policy. On health, first of all, we do a lot more on mental health. Richard has made the case enormously about the IAP program in the UK is brilliant. And it's tragic what we don't do on mental health. So there's lots we could do there. But more generally, I think my colleague who ran the NHS when I was Cabinet Secretary, a guy called Nigel Chris, wrote a book saying, home is for health, hospitals are for repairs. Right? Getting that fundamental point about health, that actually what we want to do is try and get as many people as possible not going into hospital. Right? And what you will hear from every politician is, we're going to have 20,000 more doctors, 5 more hospitals, we're going to have 20,000 more policemen. You know, it's all of those sorts of things, as opposed to, actually, we're going to really try hard to keep people healthy so they don't go into hospital. We're going to prevent, not cure. The Treasury starts to think, actually, this is quite good. If you think about the criminal justice system, we spend a lot on building prisons. You just heard about those horrific numbers from America. You know, that puts more people in prison. That's incredibly expensive, putting people in prison. What we should be doing, and what I tried to get through but failed, was to say to prisoner governors, your job is to reduce the reoffending rate of your prisoners. Right? So when they come out, you've trained them, you've got them a home and a job, and you've got them connections such that they never come back. Right? That would be good, wouldn't it? Well, that applause would be appropriate if I managed to get the policy through, right? It's not there yet, but I'm hoping it will be. So all those sorts of things. Education. Our education system is driven by a kind of, great desire that Tony Blair had to kind of improve grades and push grades up, particularly in underperforming schools, and it was all about exam results. And we all know where that's leading us. The evidence now in terms of the impact on well-being of kids. You know, there's a brilliant project in Manchester called the Be Well Project, which is starting to give us really fantastic results on what it is that determines the well-being of children and how we can improve it. But fundamentally, we need a system that incentivizes our Ofsted, our regulator, to incentivize schools to do the work in terms of improving the well-being of their kids. We know what to do, it's just a question of doing it. Okay, the one point I say is when we did the whole behavioral stuff, we had a thing called mind space, which we used to use, which was a mnemonic, which was what are the important things about it. So the M was for messenger, the I for incentives, the N for norms, the D for defaults, the S for, can't really remember, the P for priming, the A for affect, the C for commitment, and the E for ego, and the S was for salience. Got it. I want to talk just about that first bit, the M, the messenger. So who's the messenger that's going to do this, right? And I'm going to come back to my days in government, G7, right? G7 leaders coming together, who did they really look up to? And they all really looked up to whoever had won the last election, right? They desperately care about winning elections. Hardly surprising, because that's what they're in the business for. So if we get that breakthrough moment where one politician comes through and has a program of well-being and wins, boy, will they be like a herd of cats. They'll be right there. Now, this comes back to the example we heard before, Roger Bannister, right? Roger Bannister, it's impossible to get through the 4-minute mile. It's impossible to win an election with well-being. It's not, right? We need one person to go through. I was hoping that former Cabinet Office, UK Cabinet Office civil servant, Jacinda Ardern, not many people know where she worked first, would be the person, would be the Roger Bannister. That's not likely to happen now. I don't know who it's going to be. Maybe it's Keir Starmer in the UK. That would be brilliant. But we do need that to happen. So I'm running out, 50 seconds. Finally, so I've done that pathos, the ethos, the logos. The logos is easy. I'm going to subcontract the logos because the research, right? I said what motivates politicians is wanting to win elections. So, chapter 17 of Richard and Jan's book, the relationship between well-being and voting, right? This tells you if you actually get well-being up, they like you. I mean, wow. I mean, did it take academics to prove that? But it does. And also, it turns out that when you look at the populist parties, they are very much at the extremes driven by people with very low well-being. So there's a lot more in chapter 17 of this. All I would say is, I have 5 seconds. Basically, go forth and let well-being come first. And secondly, you have nothing to lose but misery. But please, in that cookie jar, take the golf ball out and say, I'm going to put the well-being golf ball in there, and I'm going to work for and with politicians to try and get them to have this as their agenda, and then I'm going to vote for them. Thank you.